It all started with a casual dinner at my brother Lucas's house. He had just moved into a new place, much larger and more luxurious than his old apartment, and invited me over to celebrate. Lucas had always been good at hosting, charming everyone with his quick wit and easygoing nature. But something about that night felt off. The house was extravagant, far beyond what I thought he could afford, even with the inheritance we'd received after our parents passed away 2 years ago. The gleaming hardwood floors, high ceilings, and expensive artwork adorning the walls screamed wealth. "So, what do you think of the place?" Lucas asked, handing me a glass of wine. "It's nice," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Very nice." He grinned. "Rachel wanted something bigger, for when the kids come along. And hey, life's short. Might as well enjoy it, right?" I nodded, though unease crept into my chest. I couldn't help but notice how much his lifestyle had changed recently. The new house, the sleek sports car parked in the driveway, the designer watch glinting on his wrist. None of it aligned with the modest life Lucas used to live. "Things have been going well, I take it?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. He shrugged, taking a sip of his wine. "Yeah, you could say that. Investments have been paying off, and work's been good." I forced a smile, but the explanation didn't sit right with me. Lucas hadn't mentioned any big investments or promotions during our recent conversations. And as far as I knew, he was still freelancing, hardly the kind of job that funded Tuscan wedding plans and luxury vacations. I tried to push the thoughts aside and enjoy the evening, but as the night went on, the feeling of unease grew stronger. A week later, I received an invitation to Lucas and Rachel's engagement party. It was being held at a high-end venue downtown, the kind of place you only see in glossy magazines. When I arrived, the grandeur of the event took me by surprise. The venue was decorated with fresh flowers, crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and waitstaff circulated with trays of champagne. It was a far cry from the low-key gatherings Lucas and I used to have at our parents' house. "Hey, glad you could make it," Lucas said, clapping me on the back. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, though I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. As the night went on, I overheard snippets of conversations that only deepened my suspicion. Guests were marveling at Lucas's generosity, praising him for sparing no expense on the party. "He's really gone all out," one woman said. "I heard the wedding's going to be in Italy. Can you believe that?" "Italy?" I thought, my stomach tightening. How could Lucas possibly afford all this? I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the questions lingered. Later that night, I logged into the shared account we used to monitor the family trust. It wasn't something I checked often. Lucas had taken over the responsibility of managing it, and I trusted him to handle it. But something compelled me to look. As I scrolled through the transactions, my heart began to race. Large sums of money had been withdrawn over the past year, far more than what should have been necessary for regular expenses. The transactions were marked with vague labels: consulting fees, property investments, business development, but they didn't make sense. I clicked through page after page, each transaction adding to the growing pit in my stomach. Tens of thousands of dollars were missing, and I had no idea where it had gone. My mind raced as I tried to piece it together. Could Lucas be using the trust to fund his extravagant lifestyle? It seemed impossible. He was my brother. I trusted him. But the numbers didn't lie. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. Something was very, very wrong. After discovering the unusual activity in the family trust account, I couldn't sleep. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing in circles. The transactions didn't make sense, and the sums of money involved were staggering. The next morning, I sat at my desk, staring at the printouts I'd made of the account statements. I'd highlighted the most suspicious entries, hoping that some kind of pattern would emerge. But no matter how many times I reviewed the documents, the details didn't add up. Who were these payments going to? What were they for? And why hadn't Lucas mentioned anything about them? I decided to call the financial advisor who had helped set up the trust after our parents passed away. Mark had always been straightforward and professional, and I hoped he could provide some clarity. "Mark, it's Ethan," I said when he picked up. "Ethan, good to hear from you," he replied warmly. "What can I do for you?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I've been looking over the trust account," and there are some transactions that don't make sense to me. Large withdrawals, mostly over the past year. Mark's tone shifted, becoming more cautious. I wasn't aware you were actively managing the account. I thought Lucas was handling everything. He is, I said quickly. But I just wanted to check in and make sure everything was in order. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Well, I'd have to look into it to give you a definitive answer. Do you have specific transactions in mind? I rattled off a few of the most suspicious entries. Mark hummed thoughtfully. Those are substantial amounts. Have you spoken to Lucas about this? Not yet, I admitted. I wanted to get some context first. I'll do some digging and get back to you, Mark said. But Ethan, if there's something going on here, it might be a good idea to have a conversation with your brother. Thanks, Mark, I said, though the thought of confronting Lucas made my stomach churn. The days that followed were excruciating. I tried to go about my normal routine, but the questions about the trust gnawed at me constantly. I couldn't bring myself to talk to Lucas, not yet. I needed more information, something concrete I could point to if he denied everything. Mark called back 3 days later. Ethan, I've looked into the transactions you mentioned, he said. Some of them seem legitimate, payments to property management firms, legal fees, things like that. But there are others that don't have clear explanations. They're going to accounts I don't recognize, and the descriptions are vague at best. What does that mean? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. It means someone could be using the trust for purposes it wasn't intended for, Mark said carefully. You should definitely talk to Lucas. And if he doesn't have a satisfactory explanation, you might want to consult an attorney. My chest tightened. I thanked Mark for his help and hung up, the weight of his words sinking in. That evening, I decided to stop by Lucas's house unannounced. If he was mismanaging the trust, or worse, stealing from it, I needed to confront him directly. When I arrived, the house was quiet. Rachel answered the door, her expression lighting up when she saw me. Ethan, what a nice surprise, she said. Hi, Rachel, I said, forcing a smile. Is Lucas home? He's in his office, she said, stepping aside to let me in. I found Lucas sitting at his desk, typing on his laptop. He looked up when I entered, his expression shifting to one of mild annoyance. Ethan, he said, what brings you by? We need to talk, I said, closing the door behind me. His eyebrows raised. About what? The trust, I said bluntly. I've been looking at the account, and there are transactions I don't understand. Lucas leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. What kind of transactions? Large withdrawals, I said, pulling out the printouts I'd brought with me. Payments to accounts I don't recognize, labeled with vague descriptions like consulting fees and property investments. He glanced at the papers, his expression unreadable. And, I said, my voice rising, I want to know what's going on. This is our parents' legacy, Lucas. If you've been misusing the trust. I haven't misused anything, he interrupted, his tone cold. Every transaction was necessary. Necessary for what? I demanded. For the house? The car? The engagement party? Lucas stood, his chair scraping against the floor. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice tight. Then explain it to me, I said, slamming the papers down on his desk. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Lucas's jaw clenched, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. I've made some investments, he said finally. High risk, high reward. They'll pay off in the long run. Investments? I repeated, my stomach sinking. With the trust money? Would you rather let it sit there collecting dust? He snapped. I'm trying to grow it, Ethan. For both of us. This isn't what Mom and Dad wanted, I said, my voice shaking. They trusted us to take care of this, to preserve it for the future. And you've been using it like your personal bank account. Lucas scoffed. You've always been so self-righteous. Do you really think you're better than me? You have no idea what it's like to manage something like this. I trusted you, I said, my voice breaking. I trusted you to do the right thing, and you've betrayed that trust. I left the house feeling angrier and more confused than ever. Lucas hadn't given me any real answers, and his defensive attitude only made me more suspicious. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the documents spread out in front of me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than Lucas was letting on, and I was determined to find out the truth. The next morning, I started making calls. I reached out to the property management firms listed in the transactions, trying to verify the payments Lucas had claimed were legitimate. Most of them checked out: maintenance fees, utility costs, minor renovations. But one name kept coming up: Regency Holdings. I couldn't find any information about the company online. No website, no contact information, nothing. The payments to Regency Holdings were the largest in the trust's records, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. When I brought this up to Mark, he confirmed my suspicions. It's a shell company, he said, probably created to funnel money somewhere else. But where? I asked. That's the million-dollar question, Mark said. Or in this case, the multi-million-dollar question. As the pieces started to come together, so did my resolve. I didn't know what Lucas was hiding, but I knew it was bigger than just bad investments or poor judgment. He was keeping secrets that could tear our family apart. And I was going to uncover them, no matter what it took. The deeper I dug, the more unsettling the puzzle became. Regency Holdings, the shell company siphoning money from the trust, was at the center of it all. Every attempt to track it down led to a dead end. No office, no phone number, not even a registered address. It was a ghost. I spent hours researching, combing through public records and databases, but I found nothing. Whatever Lucas was doing, he had gone to great lengths to cover his tracks. My frustration hit a boiling point one evening when I sat alone in the dim glow of my laptop. The numbers, the transactions, the vague explanations, they swirled in my head like a storm I couldn't escape. I couldn't stop thinking about the housewarming party, the engagement party, the extravagant lifestyle Lucas seemed to have embraced overnight. He hadn't just been spending money. He had been flaunting it, and I still had no idea why. The following day, I decided to confront him again. This time, I came prepared. I had printed out everything I could find on Regency Holdings, what little there was, and compiled it with the trust transaction history. It was a thin stack of evidence, but it was enough to make my case. When I arrived at Lucas's house, Rachel answered the door. She looked surprised to see me, but welcomed me inside with her usual warmth. "Lucas is in his office," she said, gesturing toward the hallway. As I walked toward the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was quiet, too quiet. Normally, Lucas had music playing or the TV on in the background, but today there was only silence. I knocked on the door, and when Lucas called for me to come in, his voice sounded strained. He was sitting at his desk, staring at his computer screen with an intensity one had never seen before. His posture was stiff, his jaw tight. "What do you want?" he asked without looking up. I closed the door behind me and set the stack of papers on his desk. "We need to talk." He glanced at the papers, his expression darkening. "Not this again." "Yes, this again," I said firmly. "Lucas, I know about Regency Holdings. I know it's a shell company, and I know you've been funneling money from the trust into it. What I don't know is why." Lucas's eyes flicked to the papers, then back to me. "You've been busy," he said, his tone cold. "Don't deflect," I said. "What are you hiding?" For a moment, he didn't say anything. The room felt heavy with unspoken words, the air thick with tension. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You wouldn't understand. Try me," I said, crossing my arms. He shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "You've always been so quick to judge, Ethan. So sure you're better than everyone else. But you don't know what it's like to carry the weight of responsibility, to make the hard decisions." "This isn't about responsibility," I snapped. "This is about you stealing from our parents' legacy." "Stealing," he repeated, his voice rising. "You think I wanted to do this? You think I had a choice?" "What are you talking about?" I demanded. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You wouldn't get it. You've always had it easy, Ethan. You don't know what it's like to feel trapped, to have no way out." "Trapped by what?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What are you talking about, Lucas?" For a moment, I thought he might tell me, but then he shook his head again, his expression hardening. "It doesn't matter. You wouldn't believe me anyway." "Try me," I said again, my tone softer this time. But Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to his computer, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. I left his house feeling more confused than ever. Lucas's cryptic comments only added to the mystery, leaving me with more questions than answers. What was he hiding? And why did he seem so Desperate? The next day, I received an email from Mark, the financial advisor. Ethan, I did some more digging into Regency Holdings, the email read. I found a connection to a private law firm that specializes in handling unconventional transactions. I'm not sure what it means, but it might be worth looking into. Attached to the email was the name and address of the firm, Lansing & Cole, LLP. I wasted no time. That afternoon, I drove to the address, a nondescript office building in the heart of the city. The firm's name was etched in small letters on a bronze plaque near the entrance. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but I need to speak with someone about Regency Holdings." Her smile faltered slightly, but she nodded and asked me to wait. 15 minutes later, I was ushered into a sleek conference room, where a man in a tailored suit was waiting. He introduced himself as Andrew Cole, one of the partners at the firm. "What can I do for you, Mr. Ford?" he asked, his tone professional but cautious. "I want to know about Regency Holdings," I said. Andrew's expression didn't change, but I could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. "I'm afraid I can't discuss client matters," he said smoothly. "Is one of those clients my brother, Lucas Ford?" I pressed. He hesitated just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ford," he said. "I'm not at liberty to disclose that information." I leaned forward, my voice low. "This isn't just about money. Whatever's going on, it's tearing my family apart. Please, I need to know the truth." For a moment, Andrew looked like he might say something, but then he shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said again. I left the office feeling defeated. I had hit another dead end, and the truth felt further away than ever. As I sat in my car, staring at the bustling city street, I realized something. If I wanted answers, I couldn't wait for Lucas to give them to me. I had to find them myself. That night, I made a decision. I was going to track down every lead, follow every clue, and uncover whatever Lucas was hiding. Even if it destroyed our relationship, even if it tore our family apart. Because some secrets are too big to stay buried. The deeper I dove into Lucas's dealings, the more tangled and opaque everything became. Regency Holdings wasn't just a shell company. It was a labyrinth. Every clue I uncovered led to another dead end, another wall obscuring the truth. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of discovering something monumental, something that would explain everything. Lucas, however, seemed unbothered. I saw him at family gatherings, and he acted as if nothing was wrong. He laughed, joked, and played the charming older brother, all while I felt like I was unraveling inside. I started keeping my distance, avoiding his calls and declining his invitations. It wasn't just anger or frustration. It was the gnawing suspicion that Lucas had done something unforgivable. One afternoon, while Allison was out with friends, I decided to take another look at the trust records. I spread the documents across the dining room table, searching for anything I might have missed. That's when I saw it. A series of payments that didn't match the others. They weren't labeled with vague descriptions like consulting fees or investments. Instead, they had been marked as reimbursement personal. The amounts were smaller, $5,000 here, $10,000 there. But they were frequent, occurring every few weeks for over a year. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would Lucas need to reimburse someone? And for what? I decided to call Mark again. "Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I've found more transactions. Smaller ones this time, labeled as reimbursements. Do you know anything about these?" Mark was quiet for a moment before responding. "I remember seeing those," he said slowly. "At the time, I assumed they were related to operational expenses, mileage, office supplies, that sort of thing. But if they're concerning you, I can look into them further." "Please do," I said. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the reimbursements. Who was Lucas paying, and why? At some point, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted into a restless sleep. But even then, my dreams were haunted by fragments of the mystery. Lucas's smirk, the shadowy figure of Andrew Cole, the endless stream of missing money. When I woke up, I felt no closer to the truth than I had the day before. The next morning, I received an email from Mark. "Ethan," it read, I've looked into the reimbursement transactions. It seems the payments were going to an individual, not a business. The name on the account is Rachel Ford. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Rachel? Lucas's fiancée? Why would Lucas be reimbursing her? I called Mark immediately. Are you sure about this? I asked, my voice tight. Yes, Mark said. I triple-checked. The payments were sent to an account under her name. What could they be for? I muttered, more to myself than to him. I don't know, Mark said. But it's definitely unusual. Unusual didn't even begin to cover it. I couldn't confront Lucas outright. Not yet. I needed more information. So I decided to take a different approach. The next time I saw Rachel, I brought up the wedding. You must be excited, I said casually as we sat in the backyard during a family barbecue. Planning a wedding in Italy sounds like a dream. She smiled, her cheeks flushing. It's been a lot of work, but it'll be worth it. I can imagine, I said, keeping my tone light. How are you two managing it all? It must be expensive. Rachel hesitated, glancing toward Lucas, who was chatting with some of our cousins near the grill. He's been amazing, she said. He's taken care of everything. Everything? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She nodded. He insisted. Said he wanted to make it perfect for me. Her words only deepened my suspicions. Lucas wasn't just spending extravagantly. He was hiding the source of the money. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, I stayed behind under the pretense of helping Lucas clean up. As we carried plates and glasses back into the kitchen, I decided to test the waters. You're really pulling out all the stops for this wedding, I said, my tone casual. Lucas shrugged. You only get married once, right? True, I said. But Italy, the house, the car, it's a lot. I just hope you're not stretching yourself too thin. He shot me a sharp look. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said quickly. I'm just saying it's a big commitment. Lucas didn't respond, but the tension in the room was palpable. Over the next few weeks, I kept digging. I revisited the documents, cross-referenced the transactions, and even tried contacting some of the vendors listed in the trust records. But no matter how much I uncovered, the pieces didn't fully fit together. The reimbursements to Rachel remained a mystery, as did the connection to Regency Holdings. It wasn't until I stumbled across a seemingly innocuous detail that everything started to click. While reviewing the trust history, I noticed a recurring address linked to several payments. At first, I thought it was just a billing address for a vendor. But when I searched for it online, I discovered it was a storage facility on the outskirts of town. My curiosity piqued. I decided to pay the facility a visit. When I arrived, the place looked unremarkable, just rows of identical units surrounded by a chain-link fence. I went to the front office and asked the receptionist about Unit 42C, the one tied to the trust transactions. Oh, that one's been rented for a while, she said, flipping through her records. It's under the name Lucas Ford. I felt a surge of adrenaline. Do you know what's in it? She shook her head. We don't keep track of that. But the account's fully paid up, so the unit's still active. Is there any way I can access it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She gave me an apologetic smile. Not without the key or the renter's permission. I left the facility feeling more determined than ever. Lucas was hiding something in that storage unit, and I needed to find out what it was. I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers I'd been searching for, the truth about Regency Holdings, the reimbursements, the missing money, were locked inside Unit 42C. And I was going to get them. The mystery of the storage unit consumed my thoughts. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle I had spent months trying to solve, and I couldn't rest until I knew what Lucas had been hiding. Over the next few days, I devised a plan to gain access. I knew I couldn't ask Lucas directly. He'd stonewall me, just like he always had. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. On a quiet Saturday morning, I returned to the storage facility. I waited until the receptionist stepped away from her desk, then slipped into the hallway where the units were located. It didn't take long to find Unit 42C. The heavy steel door loomed in front of me, its lock tauntingly secure. I hesitated, debating whether to go through with it. But the need for answers outweighed the risk. I won't say how I got the lock open. It wasn't exactly above board, but when the door finally creaked open, my heart pounded in my chest. The unit was surprisingly neat, with rows of labeled boxes stacked against the walls. In the center of the room stood a table, and on it was a metal briefcase. I approached the table cautiously, my hands trembling as I reached for the briefcase. The latch clicked open, and when I lifted the lid, I was met with a sight that made my stomach drop. Inside were stacks of documents, legal papers, property deeds, and contracts bearing the name Regency Holdings. But that wasn't what caught my attention. Tucked beneath the papers was a manila envelope, bulging slightly. I opened it and froze. It was filled with photographs. The photos were of Rachel. She was meeting with a man I didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, and clearly older than her. In some, they were standing close together, talking intently. In others, they were entering or leaving what looked like hotels. The implications were clear. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. Was Rachel having an affair? And if so, what did it have to do with the trust? As I sifted through the photos, I noticed something else in the envelope. A USB drive. Without hesitation, I slipped it into my pocket. Back at home, I plugged the USB into my laptop and opened the files. What I found made my blood run cold. The drive contained audio recordings, conversations between Lucas and Rachel. In one, Lucas's voice was calm but firm. "We can't keep funneling money into this. Someone's going to notice." Rachel's voice was sharp in response. "What choice do we have? You agreed to this, Lucas. You knew what you were getting into." "I didn't agree to sink everything my parents left us," Lucas snapped. "This has gone too far." "You're not backing out," Rachel hissed. "If you do, I'll tell everyone what you did." I listened to the recordings in stunned silence. Rachel had been blackmailing Lucas, using the trust to cover up her secrets. But why? What was she hiding that was so important she'd risk everything? It wasn't until I replayed one of the recordings that the full weight of the situation hit me. "You're not going to ruin this for me," Rachel said in one clip. "You think Ethan's going to side with you if he finds out the truth? He'll never forgive you." The realization hit me like a freight train. Rachel wasn't just blackmailing Lucas. She was using the trust to protect herself. And Lucas, desperate to keep her quiet, had gone along with it. But what was the truth Rachel was so desperate to hide? I didn't have to wait long for the answer. Later that evening, Lucas showed up at my house, his face pale and drawn. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I let him in, my heart pounding. "What's going on, Lucas?" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "You've been digging, haven't you?" I crossed my arms. "What do you think?" Lucas sighed, sinking onto the couch. "I knew this would happen eventually," he said. "I just didn't think it would be this soon." "Lucas," I said, my voice firm. "What have you done?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with guilt. "Rachel isn't who you think she is," he said finally. "What does that mean?" I demanded. "It means," he took a deep breath, his voice shaking. "It means she's been lying to both of us. About everything." Lucas explained everything in halting sentences, his words tumbling over each other as he tried to get it all out. Rachel had been involved in a business deal gone wrong, one that had left her deeply in debt to some very dangerous people. When she met Lucas, she saw an opportunity to bail herself out. "She convinced me it would all be temporary," Lucas said, his voice trembling. "She said we just needed to cover a few payments, and then everything would go back to normal." "But it didn't," I said, my anger bubbling to the surface. "No," Lucas admitted. "It just got worse. She started asking for more and more, threatening to leave me if I didn't comply. And when I finally tried to put my foot down, she said—" He trailed off, his hands shaking. "She said what?" I pressed. "She said she'd tell you about the affair," Lucas said, his voice barely audible. "She'd make it look like I was the one who'd been lying, the one who'd betrayed you." The room spun as his words sank in. "Affair?" I repeated, my voice hollow. Lucas nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "She was sleeping with someone else. I don't know how long it went on, but she made sure I couldn't say a word about it. She had photos, emails, everything. And she knew that if you found out, you'd never forgive me." For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of Lucas's confession hanging heavy in the air. I felt a surge of anger, betrayal, and confusion all at once. Lucas had made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but Rachel had manipulated us both. She used us, I said, my voice shaking. Lucas nodded. I am sorry, Ethan. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know how. The days that followed were a blur. Rachel's lies unraveled quickly, and with Lucas's cooperation, I was able to recover most of the money she had siphoned from the trust. We ended the engagement, of course. Rachel disappeared shortly after, leaving behind nothing but questions and a trail of destruction. As for Lucas and me, our relationship was strained but salvageable. It would take time to rebuild the trust between us, but we were both committed to moving forward. In the end, the truth had come out, but it had cost us dearly. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Got thoughts or experiences you'd like to share? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.